Hello, this is Borzu Daragahi. I'm the founder of the Substack newsletter Badlands. And today I have a special edition, an interview with a former Chinese diplomat and now podcaster, Han Yang, and his platform called The Devil's Advocate. Please listen in to this interesting and challenging interview.
Hello everybody. Welcome to The Devil's Advocate. Today we are very pleased to welcome Mr. Borzu Daragahi, a veteran Iranian American journalist, to the show. He has been a three-time Pulitzer Prize finalist and has been a Middle East correspondent for the Los Angeles Times, The Independent, and BuzzFeed News. Is that correct?
Yeah, I think the FT is pretty good too, the Financial Times.
And the FT, yes. And currently he's an independent journalist. You are currently in Turkey at the moment doing reporting.
Yeah, I live in Istanbul and Paris.
Yeah.
Right now I'm close to the Iranian border in far eastern Turkey in the city of Van. And I spent the day interviewing people coming in and out of Iran. Okay.
Well, first, let me say Happy Persian New Year. I guess I'm not sure whether that's appropriate greeting at the moment.
It's totally appropriate. It's absolutely appropriate. Yes. So
tell us, what did you see and hear today or recently at the border?
Well, I don't want to totally preempt my own reporting because I'm on an assignment.
Of course.
But I will say that there is a variety of opinions and an extraordinary number of voices and different stories and different connections to the war. I can say this, everyone's life is being upended by the war. No one is exactly kind of delighted with the war, but many people are hopeful that it will lead to something good. Others are more pessimistic. And there was a just extraordinary depth. You know, it just sort of made me remember how well educated and kind of spiritually connected so many Iranians are coming in and out of the country. Just the substance about which they were talking, you know, and the kind of emotions they were emitting, the complexity of the feelings and their ability to kind of express those emotions. Because I speak Persian, it's easy for them. You know, it's remarkable and quite a bit different than other people in the region, I think. And I'm not sure why. Maybe it's just, you know, I mean, maybe it's just the kind of poetic history that's in Iran and just how much that's bound up in the language and the culture. The ancient nature of the country, the continuous ancient nature. But, you know, these just every single person, their viewpoint was so sophisticated in its own way. Once you get past even some of the people who were a little bit more blustery, you know, and, you know, very pro-war at first, but you scratch under the surface and the anxiety comes out and the fear and then the sense of betrayal. And the hope that they had, for example, for the reformist movement and the dreams that they have for the country and so on. So I think it was just a range of different reactions, emotions, and stories and political views, you know, including some very pro-regime people. And it was such an interesting, I would say, day of reporting that we're going to try to do it tomorrow as well.
You are one of the more prominent anti-war voices on social media, despite being an Iranian American yourself. So let me be the devil's advocate here and trying to argue the case for Israel and for America to start the war. So first, let me make the case like that's what Israel the case, why they have had to act, and you can challenge that. So for Iran, they spent the last 2 decades funding Hamas, Hezbollah, and the Houthi. There's a three-front proxy war encirclement strategy against Israel. And we had the October 7th, which is the expression of that strategy, and also the bloodiest day for Jews since the Holocaust. And if Iran came with nuclear capability, then it ends the possibility of the existence of the Jewish state. So that's why Israel said they have to act. And how do you challenge that?
Well, I would just say it's a lot more complex than that. Hamas was not the result of Iran. Iran gave it some help later on, but Hamas was a result of the failure of the Palestinian national movement, and the birth of Islamism in the Arab world. And I would, go so far as to say, and if you look at how if Iran was funding Hamas, look who else was funding Hamas: Bibi Netanyahu. Through Qatar, repeatedly giving them bags of cash and money, keeping them in power to maintain a divide and rule strategy. Hamas is not the result of Iran. Hamas is the result of Israeli aggression against the Palestinian people and dispossession of the Palestinian people. If Iran has helped a little bit, and in terms of providing some funding and so on, I think that it's probably, for the Iranian point of view, very cynical. They see Israel as a threat. They see how they were cut out of the Oslo Accords in the early 90s. If you go back there, they read the writing on the wall. They saw how the US and Israel and the Gulf states were trying to isolate Iran and basically crush their little Islamic experiment, which I don't agree with, but from their point of view. And so they saw an open door and they pushed. Hezbollah, there was no such thing as Hezbollah. There was no such thing as Hezbollah until Israel made a decision to invade southern Lebanon. The Shia were at first the most oppressed people in Lebanon. As a matter of fact, they embraced the Israeli invasion because they were so oppressed. But then the Israelis started doing what they're doing in every single war: hitting people's houses, knocking down doors, getting really aggressive. And that gave birth to Hezbollah. And, in fact, Iran did support Hezbollah. In fact, Iran became one with Hezbollah. Now, why did it do that? Okay, the history of Lebanese Shia and the history of Iranian Shia goes back to the very birth. There's a strong tie between these communities. When the Safavid kings converted the kingdom of Iran from Sunni to Shiism, they didn't know what they were doing. They actually imported Shia clerics from Lebanon there. We're talking 400 or 500 years ago. So there's a strong bond between this community. It would be just as Vietnam went communist, as China went communist, Lebanese Shia went Islamic Republic kind of style, as Iran went Islamic Republic style. This was a natural kind of ideological alignment that took place in those communities. So yeah, they supported Hezbollah for reasons of community, but also for cynical reasons of deterrence against Israel. And as for the Houthis are not 12er Shia. They're of a different sect. But they came to Iran and they're basically crazier than the Iranians are, the Houthis. They're more aggressive than the Iranians. And they came to Iran repeatedly and said, let's be partners, let's be partners. And the Iranians at first were just like, you guys are too crazy. But then after a while, when Saudi started being more aggressive in the region, when the United Arab Emirates started being more assertive in all of its international gambits and foreign policy moves, Iran was like, hey, you know what? Saudi Arabia has proxies in Syria and here and there and Libya. UAE is doing the same thing. Why shouldn't we partner with the Houthis as well?
The stated goal of the Iranian regime is they said openly that Israel needs to be wiped off the map. So Israel had to act.
Have they said that? Did one president say that one or two times and he was mistranslated? Is that the state? Can you point? I know that that's a popular thing to say, and I know that Iran, as with much of the Arab world, and including every single person on this street in the Arab world, would much rather have Israel there than not there. I'm sorry, not there than there. But did you know that Iran and Israel collaborated on arms sales all throughout the 1980s? And these two countries that supposedly want to wipe each other off the map were collaborating against Saddam Hussein when Saddam Hussein was getting too strong. When the U.S. wanted to sell weapons to Iran to fund the cocaine and Contras in Central America, they went through Israeli intermediaries. So I don't think that I think that underneath the rhetoric, there's a lot more cynicism and geopolitics at work.
Let's make the case for America. That's the published goals. Well, at least from the Trump administration, they varied quite a lot during the last 3 weeks. But I guess to summarize, they have maybe 4 main goals. One is to eliminate the nuclear threat by Iran, and the second, destroy the largest state sponsor of terrorism and its proxy network. Three is to degrade its conventional military capacity that threaten the region. And four is a regime change. They want to give the Iranian people an opportunity to rise up and overthrow the Iranian government. So which of these four are actually worthy, do you think?
I mean, I don't, having been on the inside of U.S. military actions throughout the Middle East, you said something in the beginning. You said you're against this war, even, despite the fact that you're Iranian American. I'm against this war because I'm Iranian American. It's not good for America. And you know what? Who agrees with me? America. Okay. The U.S. and American people are instinctively seeing that this is stupid, that this is insane. Iran posed no threat to the United States. The nuclear program, according to several diplomats, was being resolved. I mean, they were figuring it out. There was no issues on Iran's nuclear program for those years under which the JCPOA was in effect. The only country really, and not only just the only country, the only national security establishment in the whole world that was alarmed by Iran's having a nuclear program or any kind of nuclear program, any level of a nuclear program, is Israel, which is basically shrill and alarmist about everything having to do with Iran, because they cannot stand the idea of this regime being there. That's because it's the one regime that is willing to challenge it on its territorial ambitions. So, it's obvious to everyone, including former U.S. officials now, that basically the U.S. and the Trump administration are doing the bidding of Trump. It's, of course, the responsibility is all Trump's. I don't think that, it's fair to say, oh, Israel suckered Trump into doing this. I think that's a cheap shot. And I think that's borderline conspiratorial. Everyone can see for themselves what's happening. Trump took a lot of money from these corrupt people. He is corrupt. He basically decided that he needed to boost up his poll numbers because Venezuela didn't do the trick. He was sold on this line. He didn't consult with his own State Department, his own CIA, his own DIA to be told that this was a bad idea. They went in on it, a dream that, yeah, we know where Khamenei is. As soon as we hit him, the regime will collapse. It was obvious that this was what he was sold on, and it was not true. It was not accurate because he was basically an arrogant, idiotic fool. So it's his fault. So yeah, I don't see this as moving towards any of the goals that they want. This will not stop Iran from this war, as it is now shaping up, will not stop Iran from sponsoring militant groups that you call terror. I would call them armed populist Arab militia groups rather than terror groups, because what they do, I mean, everyone does terror. Terror is like a tank in this part of the world. Terror is just, terrorizing civilians, and everyone does that. It does not give any kind of deterrence. It actually removed by removing Khamenei, they removed the deterrence credibility of the U.S. because now the people who are in charge are a bunch of crazy young people who are like dreaming of living their own Iran-Iraq war. Okay, and then as for the nuclear program, if things ever calm down, Iran is going to pursue their nuclear weapons. This is, and much of the world won't blame them at this point. But that's out the window. And as for democracy, regime change, I could have told these guys that this is not going to be like that. It's not. It's the size of the country, the power of the regime, the systematic administrative power and prowess and tentacles of the regime are such that it cannot be like that easily overthrown. You're going to have to send in ground troops. You're going to, and people are really intimidated. One of the things that I learned from talking to people who are just coming out of Tehran is that they're basically every public street, every main street, there's soldiers and paramilitaries and police standing around, just standing around, ready to shoot in case there's the slightest sign of any kind of popular uprising. So I think that is not going to happen. The regime, the regime in the United States shows more sign of cracking than the regime in Iran, with Joe Kent's resignation and Tulsi Gabbard's rumored resignation coming up in a few days. There are more splinters there than there are in Iran. They keep martyring these people. They turned Ali Khamenei into a hero. They gave this goddamn like war criminal and corrupt thug a hero's death that he will, that his successors will cherish. His banners everywhere. People are and they put his son in charge, and many people are saying wish the dad was back because the son seems really much more hardcore. So I just don't see any of those goals that this war will very unlikely accomplish any of those goals except reducing Iran's missile capacity, but it also seems to ironically be increasing its missile capacity because now they're doing stuff that we never thought they could. They're probably in their underground cities innovating and here's the really harsh part, okay? Here's the really harsh part is that, and as an American, this breaks my heart because I see the pictures of the kids who are coming home in body bags, and they remind me of the kids that are in my high school yearbook, that fresh-faced look from middle America. I went to school in Illinois. The really harsh part is that Russia and China are going to use this war. This is a gift to Russia and China because they're going to use this to bleed America. They're going to use it to bleed out America. And Putin is saying, I'm going to do to you what you did to me in Ukraine, in Iran. And that is basically, we're going to have basically World War III. It will go on for years. It'll become Ukraine and Iran will merge as battlefields for these two axes, and the Europeans are smart to stay out of it.
So the question is, but do you agree that the Iranian regime is an existential threat to Israel?
I think that not as it currently is. I mean, I don't think that it's not. It wishes it was a potentially existential threat to Israel, but I also think that there can be a modus vivendi between Israel and Iran. I don't think that, empirically speaking, Iran without nukes is an existential threat to Israel. I don't not without nukes. Once again, I'm just speaking totally empirically. I don't care what they say about each other. The Iranians may say we're going to wipe the Israel off the map. The Israelis may say Amalek. That the Iranians are basically kill the farm animals too. Whatever, this kind of rhetoric you get from politicians. This is how you rally the troops. This is how you mobilize men to fight, and women, of course. So I don't look at that. But empirically speaking, Israel is far more of an existential threat to its neighbors right now, simply because it has nuclear weapons, than Iran is to its neighbors.
Was the decision correct last year for Israel and America to bomb the Iranian nuclear facility?
I don't think it was, because it closed off diplomacy. And I think that it was the precursor to what you have now. That was just the appetizer. This was always the main course. And so I think it was not a good decision. I think that the U.S. could have gotten what it wanted through diplomacy. As a matter of fact, they were in the middle of negotiations when this happened. And there's a precedent for the U.S. getting some kind of satisfactory deal that was good enough that it satisfied the Europeans in 2015. Yes, Israel was opposed to it. But, Israel would be opposed to any kind of diplomacy between the U.S. and Iran that would cut it out of the process and the decision-making process. What the Israelis want is Jared Kushner in the room, whatever deal is being made, and anything short of that, they won't accept. And that's why they didn't like the 2015 nuclear deal. And that's why they began the war last year and convinced the Americans to drop bunker busters onto those nuclear sites. That basically, it created the escalation. Dropping those bombs objectively made it impossible to know anymore how Iran's nuclear program was progressing. So we don't have eyes anymore on it because it's buried underground. We don't know how many kilos are there. We don't know if someone has removed it. Before, there was cameras there and IAEA inspectors coming in and out. And so this created a situation where this war became, necessary. On the nuclear aspect, it became necessary because we don't have any eyes on that program. I don't know if even Iranians have eyes on the program at this point because it's buried under a mountain.
So let's suppose you are the Israeli prime minister and you know that Iran is, say, a few months away from weapons-grade uranium. What do you do?
Well, I mean, I would relax. first of all, because having weapons grade uranium is not enough. You also need to miniaturize that. If you look at the science of it, and I have, unfortunately, for years, you have to miniaturize that weapons grade uranium. You have to put it onto a nuclear device. You have to master the implosion process, the very highly sensitive process through which millions of atoms are driven at the same time into the nuclear core and create the nuclear fusion reaction. That has to be mastered. Iran has stopped working on that even in 2003, by all accounts. Including the people who are in the program, it has not advanced in that. And could they do it in a laboratory? Probably, but it would take them a year or two to do that. And then I would go back to the Saudis and I would say, hey, we're going to establish a Palestinian state, and we're going to make peace the way you asked for it in 2000, wherever it was when they made the Saudi peace deal. We're going to give this section of Jerusalem to the Palestinians. We're going to set up a fair deal for them, and then we're going to have peace with Saudi Arabia. And then after we have that peace, then we'll be in a better position to confront Iran, because Iran won't have this open door of the Palestinian issue to push through. We're going to define our borders. We're going to stop launching escalatory attacks against Lebanon, and we're going to retreat from Syria. So if you ask me what I would do, that's what I would do. I would try to make peace with my neighbors and have good relations with the.
What about the Hezbollah's thousands of rockets aiming at Israel? If you were Israel prime minister, what would you do to that threat?
Like I said, I would make peace with my neighbors. And you talk about Hezbollah striking at Israel. It has been right now over the past year and a half. I think there's some kind of peace agreement between Hezbollah, and there's something like, I don't remember how many thousands of violations by Israel. And as long as you are doing those attacks, as long as you're assassinating, some third-ranking Hezbollah leader, you're gonna have war. So I think that Israel should take a look in the mirror and look at its own conduct and its warlike, Spartan-like attitude, its paranoia, its culture of militarism, its belief that assassinating one guy is going to do anything but just further escalate the situation, and look for off-ramps that include diplomacy rather than and concessions. Land for peace was adopted by many Israeli governments before, and it was Netanyahu's aim when he entered politics to destroy the concept of land for peace, and that's what he's doing. Maybe they should unelect Netanyahu and go back to that principle of land for peace.
But October 7 happened, and that's the largest single-day massacre of Jews since World War II. Yeah. And what should Israel do to respond to keep its nation secure after that?
Well, I mean, at this point, at the point of October 7th, yeah, if you play when you play the game of war and escalation, eventually it's going to bite you in the back. And so I would call what happened there, as horrible as it was, as unacceptable as it was to kill civilians, blowback for Israel's bad policies with regard to the Palestinian territories. I don't know what they should do. I'm not a military guy. I would say that doing double tap hits on hospitals and schools is not any solution to basically launch a war of what appears to be ethnic cleansing, full of war crimes that make your country a pariah state throughout much of the world, is not a solution. Thankfully, I'm not a policymaker, but if I were a policymaker, my solution to avoid an October 7th would have begun 5 years earlier. But yeah, October 7th is wrong. How do you respond to it? Not by killing children.
Okay, but let's say, suppose you are Israeli and you live in a city there in Haifa, and you have children there, and then Iran is sending rockets, and they say they are weeks from creating a nuclear bomb. What would Israeli civilian want from that situation?
It's a kind of hypothetical. Let's say you're a Palestinian and you have an 8 and 11-year-old child, and you could set that for any of the people in this party, in this war. I would say, don't elect governments that are warmongering fools. I would say to them. If you really want to protect your children, have good relations with your neighbors instead of demonizing them. I mean, you can't ignore, everyone has children. Everyone loves their children. And can I tell you something? The, Iranian parent who's burying their 12-year-old girl because a U.S. Tomahawk missile hit it, they don't love their children any less than the Israeli parent who buried their kid after October 7th. Or the American parent who's burying their son, after after he dies in a Iranian attack in the Gulf. I think everyone has children, and everyone loves their children, and everyone's rights and human rights and right to live and exist should be respected, not just focusing in on one people who happen to control certain parts of the media narrative in certain parts of the world.
Well, you were born in Iran and you still have extended
Yes.
family there. And obviously, a lot of Iranian families are being persecuted and they have been oppressed by the Islamic regime for decades. As an Iranian American, don't you want the regime to be overthrown?
Yeah, by people in the country. And actually, I've been covering protests there, in that country for forever. And I would say that my coverage is quite sympathetic when the people are protesting and fighting against the regime and fighting for their own rights. And I've actually was in the middle of one of these protests in 2009 when it was the best chance for overthrowing the regime, because you had for the first time cracks in the regime, and you had senior figures siding with the protesters, joining the protesters in the street. So I absolutely believe in that. And, as peaceful of a transition as it could be, given how violent and extremist the Islamic Republic is. But this is not going to do it. This is not going to lead to an overthrow of the regime. This is not the way to do it. It's simply not. It's hardening the resolve of the regime. It's giving the regime a new lease on life. They got rid of the conservative 86-year-old guy, and they got a dynamic guy who's 56-year-old, and his younger and meaner and angrier, like, homeboys who are working together now and doing a pretty good job of showing the world that Iran has capabilities that no one dreamed it could have. No one expects this. And they're, also like running a good PR campaign. No one expected that, And so I think that this is not the way to make the regime weaker. This is the way to make the regime stronger. War is the glue that holds the Islamic Republic together. The Islamic Republic was born in war and blood, and it has been hungry. The people in the military, the macho guys who are in the Revolutionary Guard, the gung-ho people in the Basij have been hungry, have been lusting for a conflict like this against America, to consolidate their power, to bind them with the people, to bind themselves in martyrdom with the people and their ancestors and so on. They've been dreaming of this, and you gave them this gift, and you made their supreme leader a martyr, and you killed 160 school children. I mean, on the first day. WTF. This is like what Iranian Shia live for, this cause of being the underdog against the powerful. On the plains of Karbala, we will avenge you, Hussein. This is the attitude that these people have, and you invigorated it at a time when it was kind of faltering, and people were just waiting for an opportunity to go back into the streets again and protest.
I've met quite a few Iranian Australians here in Sydney, and the super majority of them, the opinion are strongly pro-war, and they say their family, in fact, in Iran are also strongly in support of the U.S. and Israel's bombing campaign against the government, because they say they don't have any other choices now. This is the last option available for them, for the external forces to try to help, use military force to help them, give them this last chance opportunity to overthrow the government. So what do you say to them, especially the diaspora overseas in the US and in Europe and in Australia, who are strongly in support of the war?
I would say that, and I talked to people who were just coming out of Iran who expressed that same opinion. I would say that, a war criminal and a pedophile and corrupt, what should I call him, game show host, are using your spirit of democracy and your protests and your honest hopes for Iran are using and exploiting it to pursue their geopolitical ambitions. That's what I would say to them. And I think that they are using one particular television station called Iran International, which is funded by Saudi Arabia to kind of gaslight people and astroturf the whole social media and political environment to give people an impression of how the regime works, and that is not accurate. And I would hope that as the war continues, people will start to see through this. Even Bibi Netanyahu and Donald Trump now have dropped the whole regime change argument. They just want a deal. It's so obvious to anyone who's watching that Donald Trump is in over his head and he just wants to basically find an exit plan at this point. I mean, isn't it obvious? Like the guy is basically shooting out little ideas. He's threatening to bring soldiers through the Strait of Hormuz, which is totally unrealistic. He's trying to spook the Iranians. He wants out. He wants an exit. He doesn't have the patience to oversee a long war like this. He's no Lyndon B. Johnson. He's not even a George W. Bush. He wanted a quick, easy victory like Venezuela. He was high off of that victory. He wanted to bring his poll numbers up, so he launched this, and now he's trying to figure out a way to get out.
Do you think the pro-war Iranian Americans in the diaspora are overrepresented in the Western media?
Well, it seems like that. I mean, I think that they are. I think that they're more vocal and they're more bullying. And a lot of the monarchists are out and out kind of aggressive and engaged in behavior that's borderline illegal, almost racketeering. You put up this flag in your store, or we'll organize a boycott around you. We'll continue to harass you. We'll put up social media calling you a defender of the Islamic Republic. In a poll that was conducted with the cooperation of a respected American polling group, the Zogby International, as well as a Iranian organization called NIAC that is not that respected, but I respect Zogby. It's about half-half opinion. And I sense that today too, talking to people who are coming out of the country. A lot of people are not like against the regime, but just really, really worried about this war and this whole strategy.
The situation at the Turkish-Iranian border, if the war continues, do you see more refugees coming out?
You know what? It's crazy. There's no refugees. All the people who are coming out were coming for tourism. They're coming for a little break. They were coming in their nice BYD electric vehicles, some of them. They were all, and what people were telling me in Van is that the numbers are way down. And in addition, like they're from usual years at this time, people come to Van because it's like the closest city to Iran, and they can go and sit and go drinking at bars. But in a kind of testament to the bravery of the Iranian people, more of them are staying put this year than leaving the country for Nowruz because they want to be with their families and they're worried about their properties, and they just don't worry about getting back into the country. The airports are closed, so it would require a long drive to get to the border. But what another extraordinary thing that was, and some of the taxi drivers that were taking people there, we took a taxi there, the driver was telling me that what's extraordinary is you see so many people who are going back in. Not only are like not a lot of people are coming in or coming out, but significant number are people who are rushing back to be with their families, to be in solidarity with their country, and so on, which is strange. There's zero refugees that you would call. As a matter of fact, there was I am preempting some of my reporting here. There was actually a UN car there, and the UN HCR people were there just monitoring, and they were saying they were giving all these facts that there aren't that many people here.
One of the key arguments you made against this war is that you covered Iraq from 2 decades ago, and because of the disaster of the Iraq, and you are seeing that America is making the same mistake. But isn't Iran very different from Iraq? Iran has a larger middle class, has a much established civil society, and has a very strong opposition movement, popular movement against the government.
I would just say that, maybe Iran has a larger middle class as people perceive it, but I think that the view that Iranians have of Iran in the diaspora is very warped, and that there's plenty of very poor people in Iran. There's a lot of uneducated people in Iran. There's a lot of very religious people. The level of people who are very traditional, very high number of people who are living very traditional lives, they just aren't in the cities. They aren't very visible. And outside of the country's 93 million people, how many of those are actually middle class? We don't know. But I can tell you this, when you go to any of those shrines or religious pilgrimage sites and so on, you see those people who are not on TV. And you see a lot of ordinary, salt of the earth people who do not belong to the middle class. These are laborers, these are day workers, and these are, street sweepers. There's plenty of people like that. And as for civil society and opposition politics, no. I mean, one of the things that the Islamic Republic has done is destroy all civil society, except that which is under its very control. There's not much civil society. There's not much in terms of civil society groups, organizations. There have been attempts. There's been people trying to form stuff and create some kind of momentum towards genuine civil society. But everything is very tightly controlled by the regime, and everything is very tightly monitored by the state. And as for the opposition, I think the Iranian opposition is horrible. Just look at how they swear at people. And cuss at each other and refuse to talk to each other, refuse to listen to each other. Look at the comments under my tweets that are, they're so horrible and awful. Sometimes I just, hide the replies just because I find them embarrassing for the Iranian community, and to show that the level of discourse is such that every time people get into a disagreement, the conversation turns to like my mother's lower body. I mean, it's really pathetic, and there's not much in terms of a real opposition politics. There's this one guy who is a guy from Maryland. He's lived in Maryland almost all of his life. He is nothing extraordinary. I've interviewed him before years ago. He struck me as a very flawed character. He doesn't read books. He doesn't really know Iran that well. He's a big fan of country music. And this guy is like a grifter as well. He's a little bit of a con artist, and he's been flat broke because his family's estate was pilfered at the beginning of the revolution. And so he has had to find ways to fulfill his luxury lifestyle for himself and his wife and his daughters. And his grift is this: I'm warning people that this guy is not the driver. He's not the guy who's going to lead the country. He's going to refuse to come into the country even. I mean, maybe he will rise to the occasion, but he hasn't shown evidence that someone who would rise to the occasion. What would have been rising to the occasion? Spending the last 40 years unifying various segments of the Iranian opposition, going to Beijing and Moscow and lobbying, okay, you can't get a meeting with Putin, but lobbying people at government affiliated think tanks to take him seriously. He did none of that. He did no attempts at trying to do actual opposition building or diplomacy. Why am I mentioning those things? Those are the kind of things that the Iraqi, Libyan, Syrian, Sudanese opposition did when they were trying to get into power during moments of transition in their countries. And this kid has done none of that stuff.
You're referring to Prince Pahlavi.
He's no prince. Reza Pahlavi. He's a rather mediocre guy. I mean, his grandfather was not a mediocre man.
So you don't see
his grandfather was extraordinary.
So you don't see any role he can play in the future.
I mean, I would refer you to the people who are around him and the accounts of those who have defected from his camps, like Ali Reza Nader, or I forget his name now, the cartoonist, quite famous Iranian cartoonist who was once part of his circle and defected, in horror and shock and disgust at what he had seen around Pahlavi. So I think I don't see him as a credible opposition leader, and not because I don't want to. God, it would be so awesome to have someone like him. Have you ever thought about this? Can I tell you something? I think the Islamic Republic loves this guy. Who do they try to kill? They try to kill Masih Ali-Nejad. They try to kill this very active woman who is in New York, who's left the country after the 2009 uprising, and they tried to kill her like 3 times because she's out there on the screen. She knows the language of Iranian streets. She speaks that idiom, and they try, as flawed as Masih Ali Nejad may be, as shrill as he is, as stupid as some of her decisions and associations are, she is someone that the regime views as a threat. They've never tried to do anything with Pahlavi. They consider him a gift.
Many of the Iranian Australians I talked to here, they have a very fond memory of the pre-1979 days of the Shah dynasty. And this, do you agree with that nostalgia, or they were warped by their ideology, the memories?
I think they're just like nostalgia. I mean, if that's the last memory they have of Iran, I mean, it's a very, they're remembering their childhood, and Iran is a totally different country now. It's far closer to its neighbors in terms of and the perception of its neighbors. Like, it's far closer to, I mean, it has just as much in common with Pakistan as it does with Turkey. It's kind of a mess. It's kind of a messy country with like a middling development parameters, in terms of its infrastructure, in terms of its highly educated population is more a reflection of the fact that the clerics that were in charge and are increasingly less in charge and so on treated the whole country like a schoolhouse where they were lecturing people and indoctrinating them for 47 years. This is why the literacy rate went so high, is because these people are a bunch of schoolmasters. But those people are fading away. Khamenei is dead. Now you're getting like the thugs, the guys who hang out in the gym, and do push-ups and talk about how tough and mean they are. Those are the people who are taking charge. So I think that, the other than the fact of the Iranians being quite literate, and the literacy rate is not higher than Turkey's, for example, but other than that fact, I don't think that that the country that they remember is the country that's there now. 47 years is a long time.
Well, let's see another counter argument. Like this in Syria, Obama didn't intervene, and there are like over 500,000 dead and millions in refugees, and Assad in power for years. So what is the anti-war answer to Syria? If you use that example, doesn't that call for intervention?
I mean, U.S. did intervene. They just didn't do it directly. They did it through Turkey, Saudi Arabia, UAE, and Qatar. They sent lots of weapons and lots of support, intelligence support into the country. But, they didn't put troops on the ground. And I'm not sure anyone wanted them to put troops on the ground. And, except when it came to the ISIS war. And then in that case, there was Americans on the ground there fighting against ISIS. So, I don't see it as an example of non-intervention. I see Syria as an example of Germany during the 30 Years War, when all the regional and world powers, including, far-off powers, intervene and back their little proxy armies and mercenary armies. If you get a chance to read about, and I'll say this to listeners as much as you, to learn about the 30 Years War, in which Germany lost an incredible number of its population. It didn't recover its population from that 30 Years War for centuries because so many people were killed. There's a lot of there's a lot of little similarities to the Syrian conflict. Basically everyone intervened in Syria and produced this horrific massacre. And that's basically what one of the fears that I have with Iran as well, that could happen, that it turns into a free-for-all civil war. But look, the thing is, Syria was already destabilized by the fact that it is a minority-ruled country. You have a country where an Alawite minority was ruling over a vast Sunni majority, and an Arab majority, mostly Arab, but some Kurds as well. So there was already this discrepancy. You don't have that in Iran. You don't have the big division. You have some ethnic divisions, but it's not minority rule in Iran. The Persians and the Azeris that rule the country, and that includes like Khamenei and Pezeshkian, both of them are Azeris. They were always the overclass, the Azeris. Those people make up a good 60-70% of the country in total.
So in your article in Substack, you said Iran had rebuilt after the last year's bombing campaign. And was ready
Yeah.
for war. Now, 3 weeks in this war, what surprised you with Iranians' reaction or their strategy?
I didn't think they would hit the Gulf as hard as they did. I didn't think that I think that they really are angry at the Gulf. I didn't think that they would, because the Gulf tried so hard, at least on the surface, to prevent this war from happening. I didn't expect that to happen. I didn't expect them to start hitting Saudi, Qatar, Oman, even, and other Arab countries, UAE especially, so quickly. I thought they would wait until there was more kind of clear public evidence that these countries were involved. But according to the Iranians, it was always a double game. There was always U.S. weapons positioned there for this conflict, and that the Gulfies were playing this double game. Heads I win, tails you lose. If there is not a war, we win because we kept the status quo. And if there is a war, well, we tried to prevent it. So, don't blame us if the Americans are using our bases here to launch attacks against you, because we tried to prevent it. But the Iranians didn't see it that way. So I think that was a surprise to me.
What's Turkey's role in the current war campaign?
You just want to stay out of it.
Yeah.
Stay out of it. I mean,
is that why Iran hasn't fired any rockets to Turkey?
I think they might have fired some rockets towards Incirlik as warnings, because they don't want the U.S. to start using Incirlik Incirlik is a massive NATO base in the southeast of Turkey, a huge base, and that includes nuclear weapons in that base. And so, believed to have nuclear weapons. I think they did fire a few volleys at Incirlik in what would be called a warning, and then later on they said no, it wasn't us, it was the Israelis, and the Turks bought that.
They wouldn't want to draw NATO into the war, would Iran? No.
I don't think they care. I don't think these guys care. And by the way, they wouldn't draw NATO into the attack, because the Iranians would not necessarily, at least, because Turkey would have to request it, and Turkey doesn't want that. I would say this in Turkey. I'll tell you this: I go to the bazaar, and I was with my kid, and we were trying to get. She wanted to get a tracksuit, and I was bargaining with them, and they like, "Where are you from?" When I told them that I'm Iranian, they basically immediately drop the price. They're like, you're our heroes. This war and the Iranian cause is so popular in this country. It's a 90% issue. Even the opposition leader, Özgür, he was on the floor of parliament speaking out against the Israeli and American onslaught, and speaking out defending the Iranian cause, so to speak. This has become a very popular cause. And so it's something that I don't think Erdogan would want to get dragged into.
Well, you mentioned that, and a lot of experts have said that air power alone can't topple the regime, and the Trump and Hexas hasn't ruled out any ground troops. So now the war has started for 3 weeks. What's the actual alternative? Do you support sending in ground troops to finish the job?
No, it won't finish the job. It'll just be a lot of dead people and a lot of broken hearts and a lot of mothers crying over caskets in Iran and America. I don't think it's like changeable that way. You'd have to, just look at a map. This is what I tell everybody. Look at a map. Look at, as someone pointed out, the entire province, the area where the Americans would have to control in order to control the Strait of Hormuz and prevent rockets or drones from coming, is the size of South Vietnam.
And they didn't even win the Vietnam War, no.
They didn't win the Vietnam War after 10 years, So I'm just saying, it's the problem is the geography. It's a geography that gives Iran a big advantage, and that's been since forever, I mean, there's a few ways into Iran, and one of is, and if, for example, if Turkmenistan was part of the United States, that would make it easy. But Turkmenistan is not going to take part either, because it's purely under the thumb of Putin. I mean, it's not going to take part in the war.
So if air power alone can't win the war, and you also oppose ground invasion, so what do you think the actual alternative strategy now?
For the U.S., just declare victory and get away, go away, declare victory, make a deal, cut a deal, because this is just not going to end well for anybody. That would be my suggestion. You could bookmark it. Maybe in 6 months I'll be wrong and Iran will be a democracy, and me and you will be having a cocktail inside the Borj Tehran, and I'll say, "Man, I was so wrong." And I admit it. I was wrong. This was great. This is the best thing ever. And we pray for the people who died. But thank God. But I just don't think so. I just don't think anything. First of all, I don't think anything Trump touches turns into anything good. I don't think anything Netanyahu does for any other country except his own, and maybe not even his own, does anything good. And I don't like these Trump and Netanyahu don't even believe in democracy for their own countries, much less their country. So I just don't see a formula to success here. I see a formula to despair and death and power outages and water shortages and gunmen with flip-flops standing at checkpoints and shooting someone who doesn't pay up to get past the checkpoint. And I just see all of the horrors. And you know what? Everyone keeps saying, oh, Iranians are more civilized than other people. What does civilized mean? Civilized means people who live in the city. Yeah, maybe Iran is more urbanized, more people who live in these cities. And all that means, as I've learned, is that the more urbanized the country is, the more violence and bloodshed there is when civil war breaks out, just because people are more densely packed in together. The more people die when people put up positions in mortar positions in one part of the city versus other part of the city. The more densely crowded it is, the more people die. That to me is, that's why Iraq was more deadly than Afghanistan, and Syria was more deadly than Iraq. It's just because you went up the escalation ladder of urbanization, civilization. And I think that when Iran collapses, if it collapses, it will be super bloody.
But you covered Iraq for many years. So is that correct to say now, after 20 years of conflict, Iraq has turned into a better country for itself, for its people?
Yeah, maybe right now it's after it's 23 years, actually. And if you extend it to the sanctions and so on, and the real time when the trouble started in Iraq, it's like go back to 1991, really, when the trouble started and the sanctions and the misery and the starvation and the hunger. That 12 years between 1991 and 2003 was a really tough period for the Iraqis, really one of the cruelest period. And it made what the Americans did in 2003 so much easier. This was a weakened, dilapidated people and country that had nothing to, stand up for and fight for. No metro stations built, no great achievements made over the last 12 years. So, I mean, is it 36 years, 35 years of torture and agony and heartbreak and so on. And now Iraq is at some level of ordinariness and some semblance of normalcy because the people who were, part of the militias fighting the government are now running the government. Sure, okay, if you think that's worth it, And the same thing happened with, Iraq. Afghanistan now is calm, because the people who were the insurgents are now the government. And Syria now is calm because the insurgents are the government. And, Iran is going to be quite a different dynamic because the insurgents will be the IRGC, because the militia that will that will be the dominant force will be the pro-regime militia when things fall apart.
Okay, so last question. Well, the war has started.
Oh, sure.
The war has started, even though you and we are critical of the decision to go to war, and Khamenei is dead. So what's your actual policy prescription right now? If you were the advisor to Donald Trump, as you mentioned before, just end the war, declare victory?
Just end the war, declare victory, say that it's not worth it. And it would make him maybe unpopular in certain circles that basically are very small in the United States, the pro-Israel war advocates who are, basically maybe 5% of the population. His own people would, say, look, he could just say, look, we weakened them. And they're not going to be a threat for another 5 or 6 years. It turns out that they have even more weapons than we thought they did. And that shows that they're even more of a threat. But the US and the world are not yet ready to take on this menace. For now, we're going to just retreat and let this carry out. And we're going to, maintain sanctions on Iran, but like actually quietly lift some as a little concession so that the regime stops fighting. We're going to demand that they reopen Hormuz to normal international traffic. And, basically, we showed that these guys have missiles that they didn't disclose. We showed that their nuclear program is, super dangerous. And now it's time for the U.S. to focus on internal matters ahead of its important election coming up. And now I want to talk about the border, and I want to talk about the things that you care about, and so on and so forth. And that's the best he can do at this point.
Trump has threatened to bomb the Iranian oil facilities. Would that work if you cut off the Iranian government's oil revenue? Would that collapse the government quickly?
No, I don't think it'll collapse the government quickly. There'll be other ways to get oil out. That's just one way. There's already other channels that they can get oil out. There's already reserves the country has. The Iranians didn't get much oil revenue during the 1980s war either. It'll just impoverish the people. The regime will continue its war effort. Meanwhile, you got to think about what Iran will do in response. They hit 2 of Qatar's main refinery components out of 14. They could easily destroy the other 12. And what that would do to the world economy, what that would, the recession that the world would be plunged in. They could hit, there's right now a pipeline that takes oil from the Persian Gulf, from the eastern provinces of Saudi Arabia to the Red Sea terminal. And they can bomb that pipeline. They could have the Houthis close off all Red Sea traffic, and create a lot of havoc. And I think that Trump knows that. And I think that he realizes that this is not a winnable situation. It's like basically you blow up our economy, we're going to blow up your economy. We're going to blow up the whole world economy. And they can. And then, Trump can say that these guys are even more dangerous. He can claim that as a victory. These guys are even more dangerous than we thought. And we're not, into destroying the whole world economy. So we're going to, back off for now and let the world, we're going to try to build a coalition to come back and then just like pay attention to redoing the White House lawn or whatever the hell he wants to do. The wrestling match on July 4th in the White House lawn or whatever, the WWF, whatever the hell he's going to do. And he can focus on the stuff where he can't break a lot of stuff.
Well, thank you both very much. It's very late in Istanbul
there,
and thank you for your time. And hopefully, maybe we'll get back to you in a few weeks' time, see how
sure.
it all ends up.
Yeah, I hope I'm wrong. I hope that maybe the regime will collapse, and democracy will come to Iran. I'll move back to Tehran, set up an apartment there. I'll enroll my kid in a school there, and live like a normal life in Tehran. I love Tehran. It would be fantastic to move there. Still a lot of friends who are there and so on. But I don't see it. I hope I'm wrong, and I will be the first one. If I am wrong, I will be the first one to say, mea culpa. I should have been for this war. I'll say it with enthusiasm.
Well, thank you. So best of luck to the Iranian people.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.